Good evening. I'm Mark Cloward, and welcome to the 2020 Colorado LGBT Bar Association Awards. Tonight's one of my favorite nights of the year. It's a night we come together as a community with our allies to honor members of our community who have done remarkable things for all of us. And tonight will be no different, even if we are doing it virtually. I know, as we watch the awards and the eloquent words of the keynote speaker unfold, we will all be one, united in our desire as we never stop in our march for equality, not just for members of our community, but equality for members of all communities who are marginalized and with whom we stand shoulder to shoulder in solidarity. We appreciate you joining us tonight as we celebrate and honor several tremendous lawyers of the year, a very supportive legal ally of the year, and 2 legal scholars who will receive Summit scholarships. All award recipients embody these words from the late, great Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who said, "If you want to be a true professional, do something outside yourself." Just like Justice Ginsburg did her entire life, for which we will always be mindful and thankful for. All of our awardees tonight, too, have done remarkable some things outside themselves. Thank you again for joining us. And now, on to the awards.
What a year. This is certainly not the elaborate and epic dinner at the Sewell Ballroom that we were all expecting. If there's anything that this last year has taught us, it is the value of being flexible, adapting, and finding creative ways for our community to remain engaged and in solidarity. For many, this has been a year of suffering, strife, oppression. We all have family and friends that have been impacted by the pandemic, whether they passed away, they lost their homes, they lost their jobs, financial security, or something or someone else near and dear to them. I don't say this at the beginning of our dinner here to make everyone depressed, but rather to allow us to take a moment to recognize how privileged we all are to be able to come here together tonight in solidarity, in front of our computers, in the comfort of our own homes, with high-speed internet, food, alcohol, and our loved ones. This year, as you can imagine, was challenging for the association, but our board worked tirelessly, despite this adversity, to keep our organization operating at the same level that our members have come to expect. First, before we get into all of the accomplishments of the association this year, I'd like to take a moment to introduce our board members, virtually, of course. First, we have our immediate past president, Rachel Catt, our secretary, Amanda Bauer, our treasurer, Dave Kirsting, our programming committee chair, Shanara Quissel, our CLE chair, Kiki Council, our public policy committee co-chairs, Mari Newman and Rachel Catt, our Judicial Endorsement Committee co-chairs, Adam Mueller and Meredith Rose, our annual dinner chair, Tessa Becker, our Judicial Relations Chair, Brian Large, Magistrate Brian Large, our Social Media Chair, Jordan Blisk, our Website and Technology Chair, Owen Ziegler, our Newsletter Chair, Anthony Zarsky, Mentorship Chair, Robert Dodd, Community and Professional Engagement Committee Chair, Aras Jahanian, our DU Representative, Kate Guggens, and last but not least, our President-elect, Ann Stanton. In December of last year, I announced our goals for the coming year. Of course, not anticipating that a pandemic would have some different ideas. Our first goal was to engage with the legislature. Our Public Policy Committee, led by Rachel Catt and Mari Newman, this year spoke on behalf of the association before various legislative committees, including the full House and Senate in Colorado, on the following bills. SB 217, the Law Enforcement Accountability Act, requiring police to wear body cameras, releasing footage of certain incidents, limiting the use of deadly force, ending qualified immunity, and mandating that officer-involved deaths are investigated by the Attorney General. HB 1014, the misuse of human reproductive material. HB 1158, which requires health plans to cover services related to infertility. HB 110, repealing the death penalty. HB 1048, adding race-based hairstyles as a protected category. SB 83, prohibiting courthouse arrest by ICE officials. HB 1287, creating a state cause of action for rights protected under the federal constitution paralleling 42 U.S.C. 1983 causes of action. And we also supported a bill to eliminate the trans panic defense, which ultimately lost, but will continue to support that important policy and legislation. We also played a role in defeating several bills this year, including HB 1033, which would have rolled back protections in the areas of healthcare, housing, and employment. HB 1063, which would have made it more difficult for the government to intervene in situations where there's a child in abusive or non-affirming households. HB 1114, which would have banned and criminalized gender reassignment surgery for minors. HB 1144, which would have limited minors' access to their health information and to mental health services. HB 1272, which would have limited the definition of marriage to that between a man and a woman. I thought we were past that. I guess not. HB 1273, which would have prevented transgender women from participating in women's sports from 6th to 12th grade. We also filed amicus briefs in 2 Supreme Court cases, the Colorado Supreme Court regarding common law marriage and its impact on same-sex relationships, including in LaFleur v. Pfeiffer and Hogsett v. Neal. 2 of our members, Ann Gushurst and John McHugh, argue before the Supreme Court in those cases pro bono. Moving on, our second goal is to evolve and engage with Greater Colorado. We hosted virtual coffee hours and happy hours, which included members from all over the state. Our mentorship program also took off this year virtually, and we were able to pair 14 groups of mentors and mentees across the state thanks to our mentorship chair, Robert Dodd. Our third goal was to engage law students. We sponsored and had members speak at a CU Outlaw Lunch Talk and CLE at the University of Colorado Law regarding polyamory and family law. We also did a virtual resume review and mock interviews with students in June, and we have an upcoming joint event with CU and DU to connect students as they embark upon law school via Zoom. Our fourth goal this year, was to engage with judges. We created a new judicial liaison position in our board, filled by Magistrate Brian Large, who spent the year meeting with judges and judicial officers to see how we can help them as judicial officers and give them resources on LGBTQ issues and also provide them with some best practices in working with LGBTQ litigants. Adam Mueller and Meredith Rose were heading up the Judicial Endorsements Committee, where we interviewed, I don't know how many people they interviewed. I looked through my email. I think it's at least 36 to 40 different candidates for different judicial officer positions through the state. And we sent at least 12 letters to the governor supporting different judicial appointees. Our fifth and last goal was to engage with allies. We engaged with allies by working closely with other diversity bar associations to co-sponsor legislation and advocate for systemic changes. This included adding a diversity, equity, and inclusion requirement for CLE, which we're still working on, rallying support behind SB 2217, co-sponsoring letters to the Supreme Court regarding judicial actions during COVID-19, and also working with the CBA to promote more inclusive and diverse legal practice in Colorado. This was certainly not the year that I had expected, but I am so proud of our board for all of their efforts, and I am thrilled that our membership has remained engaged with the bar this year in new and creative ways.
Hi, I'm Governor Jared Polis. I'm so happy to join you virtually here at the LGBT Bar Association Annual Dinner and Awards. It's been a different year for the LGBT community, as it has been for everybody else, as we celebrated Pride apart and wore rainbow face masks to keep ourselves safe. I also want to give a shout out to everyone receiving an award tonight: Kiki Council, Tristan Gorman, and Mari Newman as their awards for Attorney of the Year for their dedication and work on racial justice and intersectionality in the LGBTQ community. Ally of the Year, Ellen Trackman, who's done legal and legislative work supporting equality, and also congratulations to this year's Student Scholarship recipients. Congratulations and thank you for everything that you do in a Colorado for all.
All right, everyone. If you haven't already, make sure to grab a drink, grab some food. We're going to go ahead and take a moment to recognize some of our sponsors this evening. First sponsor I'd like to recognize is National Cinemedia, NCM, as a double rainbow sponsor. We have given NCM the double rainbow sponsor designation because not only have they supported us this year financially at the rainbow level, but they also provide all of tonight's video and recording services at no cost. Thank you, NCM, so much for all of your continued support of our organization. Tonight we actually have Stacy Tersey. She is the Senior Vice President of Local Sales with NCM, here to speak.
Good evening. National Cinemedia is honored, in fact, twice as honored, to be tonight's double sponsor of the event. This year, NCM's top-notch creative team volunteered to film and produce the videos you'll see this evening. They're here at our corporate office on a Saturday, fully masked and properly distanced in order to make it all happen. We thank them for their time, their talent, and their support of the event and your association. How about a round of applause? NCM supports your mission for advocacy and equality because it's our own. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are important to our core strategy and our core values. We believe in civil and human rights. We believe in fair and just treatment of the LGBTQ community. We believe that all voices should be heard, respected, and honored. We know that DEI is about culture, leadership, and it's just plain good business. NCM was thrilled to receive a score of 100% on HRC's 2020 Corporate Equity Index, the national benchmarking tool for inclusive policies and practices. We joined the ranks of more than 680 major U.S. businesses who also earned top marks this year. Apple, Amazon, and JP Morgan among them. While the SCOTUS ruling in June marked a major advancement for equality, there's still a lot of work to do. We need to keep educating, supporting, and inspiring. So, thank you for all you do, all you've done, and all you will continue to do. Keep up the good and necessary fight, and NCM will continue to stand with you. Together we can do hard things. So, enjoy the evening.
The second sponsor that we'd like to recognize is Nelson Mullins. They are a rainbow sponsor. Nelson Mullins is a full-service law firm with over 800 attorneys, over 25 offices across the country. They have also sponsored our dinner for the last several years, and we'd like to thank them so much for their continued support. We actually have a slideshow for everyone to view. I'd like to take a moment to recognize our cocktail sponsor this evening, which is the Colorado LGBT Bar Association. If you look in your pre-feature program and you look in the slideshow, there are several signature cocktails that are members designed for everyone specifically to enjoy this evening. We also have 3 platinum members, sponsors I'd like to recognize. That includes Anderson Hemmett. They've been a sponsor of ours for several years at our highest levels. The CBA-DBA, we of course appreciate their continued support and their continued partnership. And Riley LLP. Riley LLP has been a sponsor of the dinner for several years, and they also have tirelessly represented litigants in novel LGBTQ issues, often pro bono. Before we move on to the next segment of the program tonight, being the recognition of the Attorney of the Year and the Ally of the Year, I do want to take 1 minute to just give a special shout out to Tessa Becker and Shanara Quissel. They were in charge of coordinating this dinner this year virtually. We had to make a lot of tough game time decisions with very, very little notice to make this happen. And they were so tremendous at being flexible and being accommodating and really rallying the forces necessary to make this happen this year. So thank you so much again to Tessa Becker and Shinara Quissel for doing everything to make this virtual dinner what it is this year and a great success. Moving on to the awards. For Attorney of the Year. So this year, we know that issues of intersectionality came to the forefront. We watched our nation come together to mourn the deaths of those named and unnamed who have been the victim of unjustifiable police brutality. From this, we saw our community and sister communities join forces to say, this is unacceptable. Our very own members worked to write and pass legislation to end qualified immunity, to hold police officers accountable and our public officials accountable for improper uses of force. So this year's award goes to individuals who have made extraordinary strides this year and over their careers to support and recognize intersectionality between our sister communities, specifically as it relates to holding public officials accountable. Kiki Counsel is an associate attorney at Campbell Litigation PC. She was born and raised in Colorado. She attended the University of Chicago, where she majored in international studies. After undergrad, she worked with African refugees and asylees at a nonprofit organization, and she later attended the University of Colorado Law School, where she got her JD in 2017. After graduating, Kiki clerked for the Honorable Allison Ide on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit. She then joined the commercial litigation practice at Holland and Hart. Kiki's pro bono practice now focuses on immigration rights and judicial bypass hearings for minors. Kiki has always been passionate about social justice, particularly reproductive rights, LGBTQ plus rights, and the racial justice movement. Fun fact, Kiki actually attended her first protest alone when she was 17, and her mom even let her skip school to go. This year, Kiki was heavily involved in the BLM and racial justice movement, and she successfully drafted a letter on behalf of our organization to the governor to open the investigation into Elijah McClain's death. She drafted a statement in solidarity for our organization, supporting SB 217, and also condemning the recent killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery. She provided compelling testimony at the SB 217 hearings, and she even took leave from her last job in part so she could dedicate her energy fully into advocating for what she knows is right. She's also on the board of the Sam Carey Bar Association, and I think anyone who knows Kiki can say she is always available to help us answer questions regarding intersectionality issues. She is always open to educate all of us who are trying to be better and trying to do better. Kiki has earned Attorney of the Year for these incredible and successful efforts. And on behalf of the association, we are watching with wide eyes at the amazing things she is bound to do as a fierce and brilliant advocate. It is an honor to recognize Kiki Counsel as the Colorado LGBT Bar Association's 2020 Attorney of the Year.
Hi, my name is Kiki Counsel, and I'm an associate at Campbell Litigation PC here in Denver. I am extremely honored to win this award, and when I found out that I had gotten it, I felt a great sense of imposter syndrome. The reason why I think I won this award is because I have done a lot to organize the protests and participate in the protests that began in the early summer after the deaths of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd. The reason why protesting and civil disobedience is so important to me is because it's one of the few ways that I recognize and know historically that people who are like me and who look like me have been able to gain some sort of equal social and legal footing in the United States of America. Without civil disobedience, I wouldn't be able to marry a woman if I wanted to. I wouldn't be able to vote. I wouldn't be able to go into certain hotels and restaurants. There's so much that I wouldn't be able to do without the people who came before me who chose justice over order. And I think as attorneys, that's specifically what we are called to do. We are called to maintain justice over order and to recognize that even though we are lawyers and we uphold the law and we fight for the law, that sometimes the law is just wrong. It is wrong for police brutality and qualified immunity that insulates that police brutality to exist. And therefore, it's incumbent upon me as a lawyer, with my voice and my training, to protest and to fight against those sorts of injustices. The other thing that I guess I just want to say in accepting this and being so honored for it is emphasizing intersectionality. I am a Black bisexual woman attorney in Colorado, and I'm one of the few. It is so imperative that we recognize that our differences, our strengths between the Black community and between the queer community, between the LGBT community, that we work together in our differences and our strengths to fight the same war, because it is often the same war. And to recognize too that there are ways that we have harmed each other and that there are ways to reconcile that. And to understand that some of the people who are suffering most in our society are Black trans people who are being either killed or brutalized by police or by people in the Black community. Intersectionality is so important, especially right now when everything is so incredibly divisive. We need to work together, and there are ways in which we can work together. One of the best protests that I went to this summer was the Queer Solidarity March on Pride weekend here in Denver. It was absolutely beautiful to see everybody coming together in what effectively was a Pride March in solidarity against police brutality. That's essentially all that I want to say. I'm just so incredibly honored, and I can't believe that I was co-awarded this. I can't say enough about how much work Mari and Tristan have done and how incredibly important their work has been to get the police brutality bills passed and to continue to educate the public and represent those like Elijah McClain who have suffered and died at the hands of the police. So that's it.
Our second awardee for Attorney of the Year is Tristan Gorman. Tristan is a fourth-generation Coloradan who grew up in Colorado Springs during the wake of Amendment 2. That inspired her to fight for the rights of marginalized communities in the criminal justice system specifically. She is a solo attorney at the Gorman Law Firm, where her practice is comprised of criminal defense and policy work in criminal justice. She's now the Legislative Policy Director for the Colorado Criminal Defense Bar, and she's also on the Denver LGBTQ Commission. This year, on behalf of the Colorado Criminal Defense Bar, she actually testified to repeal the death penalty successfully and had a former client that was on death row and had his sentence commuted out of death row to life without parole. As an advocate, she's been exposed to how people in the criminal justice system are treated as less than human because of their race, immigration status, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, disability, socioeconomic status, or struggles with mental health and addiction. Tristan also is a member of our Judicial Endorsements Committee. Specifically, we chose to recognize Tristan this year because she assisted in drafting SB 217 with respect to all of the criminal justice-related provisions. She also testified at before the House Finance Committee on the bill. She was at the bill signing, and she was involved on the ground at the protest to coordinate the first lawyers' protest in Denver with the National Lawyers Guild, the Colorado Freedom Fund, and the Colorado Attorneys Against Police Violence. Tristan is a tireless warrior who owns her privilege and uses that privilege to help those without and to break down the systems that oppress them. It is an honor tonight to recognize Tristan Gorman as Colorado LGBT Bar Association's 2020 Attorney of the Year.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Tristan Gorman. I'm the policy coordinator for the Colorado Criminal Defense Bar and a former public defender. I want to thank you all tonight for this award. I am thrilled to be receiving it, and I'd like to take the opportunity to share with you what it means to me. The two policy areas that I have cared about and been involved in my entire career are LGBTQ rights and reform within the criminal legal system. I started my career as an attorney with the Public Defender's Office in Denver, and I have been working on reforming the system ever since I left and got into work lobbying at the Capitol. And I think it's important for us to remember, as members of the LGBTQ community, how short a time it has been that we have not been outright criminalized for who we are within our country's own legal system. Lawrence v. Texas was decided in the 21st century. I think that a lot of us remember when Romer versus Evans and Bowers v. Hardwick were decided. And we really need to take a minute and remember what happened at Stonewall. The fact that that was a rebellion led by LGBTQ people of color against an oppressive, brutal police force that was targeting and harassing and assaulting us for exactly who we are. This is why it's so important for us to stand shoulder to shoulder with people of color and with our sister communities in the fight against oppression, and particularly within the arena of police violence and brutality and the criminal legal system. This is why I was so proud of the work that I helped to do on Senate Bill 217 to try and do something about police accountability and police violence in the state of Colorado. There is still a lot more to do, and I hope that all of you will join me in supporting our sister communities and supporting that effort for reform in the criminal legal system in Colorado. Thank you again for the award. I can't tell you how much it means to me.
Our final attorney of the year is Mari Newman. Mari Newman is a civil rights attorney who has dedicated her career, and her life for that matter, to advocating on behalf of the underdog and the disenfranchised against the entrenched power of government and corporations. For nearly a decade, she's been one of the top 25 women Colorado super lawyers, and the list of awards and achievements that she has is both impressive and frankly intimidating. She's been named a 5280 top lawyer, Lawyer of the Year by Barristers Best by Law Week Colorado, and she was even a previous recipient of the Attorney of the Year award from the Colorado LGBT Bar Association Foundation in 2015 for her work specifically on the Colorado same-sex marriage cases. Mari is a Colorado Bar Association Foundation Fellow, a recipient of the Richard Martin Davis Award, the MLK Jr. Business Award, the Harvey Milk Lifetime Achievement Award, and so many more. She was this year a primary drafter of SB 217. She attended and she spoke at the hearings on the bill. She brought Elijah McClain's mother to testify before the legislature. She is now representing Elijah McClain's family in the ongoing investigation, which has gained national attention. Her work was instrumental, obviously, in reopening the investigation into Elijah McClain's murder. She's been recognized in national newspapers for her work over and over regarding racial justice and police brutality. Put simply, Mari has been suing the government for decades. She's been representing the interests of those who fall victim to its oppressive and sometimes deadly actions. Her style has been described as one who never backs down, is fearless, and doesn't really care who she might piss off. It is an honor tonight to recognize Mari Newman as, again, a Colorado LGBT Bar Association Attorney of the Year for 2020.
Last summer, about this time, I was driving home from Colorado Springs. I had just met with the family of Devon Bailey, a young black man who had been killed by the Colorado Springs Police Department. That murder happened just within weeks of the Aurora Police Department killing another young black man, and that's Elijah McClain. So I was driving home from Colorado Springs. I was seething about a system of racist brutality that had stolen the lives of these two promising young black men. And it's a system not just in Colorado Springs or in Aurora, but a system that pervades all of Colorado's law enforcement. And so as I was sitting there furious in traffic driving home, I was thinking, you know, litigating these cases one by one is some of the most satisfying work I do, but my God, what if we could make some system-wide changes and we could try to avoid these kinds of killings happening in the future? So I called my friend Leslie Herod, who's a Colorado State Representative. She actually is the only lesbian black Colorado State Representative. And I discussed with her, what can we do? We met over drinks at Blush and Blue, one of the last existing lesbian bars, and we began hatching a plan. And that plan turned into what is now Senate Bill 217. And it's widely known as the most comprehensive law enforcement bill that has been passed anywhere in this country. But it didn't start that way. Senate Bill 217 started as ideas being batted around between a couple of friends over drinks, but because of the work of an incredible legal community, a legal community that was led in this case by LGBTQ people, people of color, women, and people who fit into more than one of those boxes, it became the most amazing bill that it is today. And of course, we're continuing to work, and we'll be introducing amendments over the next session to make sure that it gets even better. And I can't call out and name every single person who worked on it, but I do want to name a few of those people. And in particular, I want to talk about the ACLU of Colorado, whose public policy team is led by a lesbian of color, Denise Mayes, along with her colleague Rebecca Wallace. Our very own Tristan Gorman, who was working on behalf of the Colorado Criminal Defense Bar, Maureen Kane on behalf of the Colorado Public Defender's Office, lawyers who testified in the state legislature, like our very own Kiki Counsel, and countless others who worked tirelessly to make sure that this bill was as good as it could be. Other people of color, sadly, also were in the room testifying, and those were the families of these young Black and brown people who are persistently killed by members of law enforcement, and people who are thrust into the limelight, thrust into this role of serving as public speakers and as ambassadors for a movement simply because they're mourning the death of a loved one. They were there too. The bill was introduced by our Black and Brown Legislative Council, and those legislatures included Leslie Herod and others. And then it was signed by our very first openly LGBT governor, Jared Polis. So this was an example of intersectionality at its finest, working toward a comprehensive law enforcement accountability and brutality bill, and I'm very proud to have been part of that group. I also want to say that every single day that we were working within the Capitol, there was an intersectional group of protesters outside yelling, chanting, and screaming in the streets, reminding all of the lawmakers of their accountability to the public. And I'm proud to say also that my 15-year-old daughter was one of those protesters, so hopefully that means my wife Elizabeth and I are doing at least one thing right. But as an activist, I always wonder, what more can I be doing? And of course, as a cis-presenting white woman, my duty is even stronger. That duty to every single day work against the forces of tyranny and oppression, to work against white supremacy, and to work against discrimination. This duty is especially present for me as a white lawyer who has all of the privilege and all of the opportunity to use my voice in one of the most powerful ways possible in our courts and in our Capitol. And now, with the death of the beloved, late, great Ruth Bader Ginsburg, it's incumbent on all of us to take a hold of one another's hands, to move forward in this fight together against oppression, and our voices must be heard because, as the great Audre Lorde has told us, your silence will not protect you.
Now I'd like to take a minute to introduce our ally of the year. It is Ellen Trackman. She is the managing attorney of Trackman Law Center, LLC, which specializes in assistive reproductive technology law, adoption, and estate planning. She's also the co-director of Colorado Surrogacy, which is a surrogacy clinic that helps people of all walks of life start their own family. Ellen was a Denver Business Journal 40 Under 40 award recipient, GLBT Community Center of Colorado 2017 Legal Volunteer of the Year, and the Denver Gay and Lesbian Chamber Entrepreneurial Woman of the Year. She started working in surrogacy when she was in her 20s, when she became an egg donor. She saw the love that she was able to bring to families to be able to start their own, and that inspired her to leave her big law job and become an artificial reproductive technology lawyer. She says that children are so incredible and life-changing, and working in surrogacy is an amazing way to make the world a better place. While running a law firm and a surrogacy clinic, and of course parenting 4 children, she somehow finds time to manage a blog for Above the Law. Ellen has annually hosted a CLE for the Association on Artificial Reproductive Technology Law. She's sponsored many of our happy hours and regularly attends our events. This year, most notably though, she advocated for and wrote HB 201158, the Colorado Building Families Act, which now requires health plans to cover diagnoses of infertility, treatment of infertility, and fertility preservation services. And this was signed into law this year and takes effect in 2022. Put simply, Ellen's work has created a reliable pathway for LGBTQ people to become parents. It is an honor to recognize Ellen Trackman as the Colorado LGBT Bar Association's Ally of the Year.
Hi, my name is Ellen Trackman. Thank you so much for this award of Ally of the Year. I am incredibly humbled and honored to receive this. For those of you who don't know me yet, I am the founder of Trackman Law Center, a firm specializing in assisted reproductive technology law, which is egg donation, sperm donation, embryo donation, and surrogacy. I'm also the co-founder and co-director of Colorado Surrogacy. In addition to those, I write a weekly legal column on assisted reproductive technology legal issues, where I've had the honor to be able to speak out when we see discrimination in this area. And I also co-host a podcast called I Want to Put a Baby in You, where I get to interview amazing people in this area. Several things this year that have been amazing that I've been able to work with the LGBT bar on. One, I'm on the board of the LGBT Chamber of Commerce. So for every year, we've been able to join the two organizations together to build better synergies between our groups. Probably one of the biggest things I'm most proud of this past year is my work with Colorado Fertility Advocates. A little less than 2 years ago, I joined with others to form a nonprofit to work in the fertility field to make sure we could overcome barriers and be as inclusive as possible. And this past year, in this past congressional session, we were a big voice in advocating for HB 1158, the Colorado Building Families Act. And we feel incredibly fortunate to have been successful and pass this piece of legislation. For those not familiar, prior to this time, most people who needed fertility treatment access, you were generally paying out of pocket, and it can be incredibly, incredibly expensive. So you break your leg, your insurance helps pay to fix that. You go to the doctor and find out you're having problems having a child, you end up paying out of pocket. And for most people, that's just the way it was, unless you were fortunate enough to work for Google or Facebook. But we saw other states changing the law to better support growing families and thought Colorado could be next. So we are happy to have advocated and to seeing that success. And starting in 2022, there's a little lag time in effectiveness, unfortunately, but after 2022, there will be better access to fertility care in Colorado. And we are very excited to be inclusive and work with the LGBT bar and other communities to make sure that language includes all forms of families and isn't exclusive as to who could access care when trying to form a family. I'm incredibly grateful again for this award and honored to work with the LGBT bar in better supporting growing families. Thank you.
I would like to thank the board members of the Colorado LGBT Bar Foundation for all of their hard work, and also the board members of the Colorado LGBT Bar Association, and especially Tessa Becker and Shannara Quisel, who have put forward countless hours to plan and organize this event. Thank you. Since just 2016, the foundation, with help from its generous sponsors like you, have awarded over $50,000 in scholarships to scholars at CU and DU law schools. I'd like to now introduce our first Summit Scholar, Bernardo Belloso. Bernardo grew up in Venezuela. He's trilingual in his native Spanish, of course, and he's also English proficient and conversational French. He realized by the time he graduated from high school, he needed to move on, and he moved away from his family and friends in Venezuela and moved by himself to Chicago, where he began volunteering at various charities in the city. For example, the Center of Halstead and the Fair Housing Legal Clinic, where he worked to end discrimination in housing in Chicago. He also attended Loyola University of Chicago, where he received a BBA in Business, Marketing, and Management, and an MBA with a concentration in entrepreneurship. While at Loyola, He volunteered at the John Marshall Law School Community Legal Clinic, which ignited his desire to attend law school. He now attends the University of Colorado Law School, and he expects to graduate in May 22 with a concentration in entrepreneurship. He describes himself as a queer Latino immigrant student, usually caffeinated and passionate, who's an organized and picky introvert, aiming to be an empathetic advocate. He's a semi-professional cook and dinner host with big hair and a bigger smile. With you in the community, Bernardo, we all have a bigger smile. On behalf of the Colorado LGBT Bar Foundation, we congratulate Bernardo Belloso as our first Summit Scholar.
I wanted to say that I'm honored to be receiving this scholarship, and I also wanted to thank all those at the LGBT Bar Association and Foundation who made this award possible. I would also like to thank the sponsors for fostering the much-needed advancement of minority leaders in our communities. Thank you.
I'd now like to introduce our second Summit Scholar, Rachel Blue. Rachel has a BA in English with a minor in psychology from Old Dominion University, where she also played as a goalkeeper on their D1 women's soccer team. She also has an MFA from Old Dominion University as well. She expects to graduate in May 2021 from DU Law School, focusing on international law. Between her first and second years of law school, she got a taste of international law when she studied abroad in Sorrento, Italy, where she was accompanied by her wife and young daughter. Before coming to law school, Rachel has been a teacher for over 18 years, first at the Tidewater Community College in Virginia Beach, Virginia, where she taught composition, and most recently as a full-time faculty member, all the while through law school, at the Community College of Aurora, where she teaches English, composition, and literature. She describes her teaching philosophy as innovative instruction with a heartfelt student engagement. She participates in Safe Zone trainings. She helped form and now acts as the faculty advisor for the LGBT Student Alliance. She's on the President's LGBT Task Force, and she's a facilitator for the Inclusive Excellence Initiative. She describes herself as, quote, in love with her daughter's giggle and her wife's intelligence, and she says she's happiest in the sea with the rhythm of the waves to slow her pulse. Her champion has always been her mother, who unfortunately passed away 10 years ago. Her mom always told her in times of trouble that, quote, tomorrow will be better. Well, with Rachel, as active as she is in our community, I know tomorrow will be better. On behalf of the Colorado LGBT Bar Foundation, we congratulate Rachel Blue, our second Summit Scholar.
My name is Rachel Blue, and I'm a student at the University of Denver, Sturm College of Law. I am pleased, honored, proud, and ecstatic to receive this year's Colorado LGBT Bar Foundation Summit Scholarship. A few of the interests that are very close to my heart are, first and foremost, graduation, May 2021. After that, I'm very much looking forward to shifting careers after a very long tenure as a college professor. And my hope when I get into the field of law is to not only affect change domestically, but on an international scale. And the hope is to help build sustainable futures for my children and for yours. Thank you.
Thanks for sticking with us, everyone. I hope you're having a good time. Take a minute to get another drink, get some food, because we're about to transition to our keynote speaker tonight. So tonight's keynote speaker is Mari Newman. Mari, specifically we asked her to speak because of her work on SB 217 this year, police brutality, intersectionality, and her everlasting fight for the underdog. She has some inspiring words to share with us, so sit back, relax, and here's Mari Newman.
Well, here we are at the LGBTQ Foundation Bar Association's 2020 dinner. No reunions with friends, no fancy outfits, no glamorous setting, just me standing here all by myself talking to this camera. And you know, a lot of people say that 2020 has been a surprising dumpster fire of a year, and it has been a dumpster fire, there's no doubt about that. But really hasn't been any kind of surprise here. And I think for us to say it's a surprise is really disingenuous when the way that 2020 has turned out is the foreseeable and inevitable consequence of a system that is built on tyranny, on oppression, and on abuse of people around us. When we divest from education, when we militarize the police, and when we quit treating people as we would want to be treated ourselves, this is how things turn out. So it's not shocking, really. But it is surprising in that we were really just on an amazing trajectory. We had just elected our first Black president, which was not a symbolic move at all. In fact, we were moving toward equality in so many different ways. And we had overcome some really monumental barriers. And that wasn't just true for LGBT people, it was true for people of color, for disabled people, for people in poverty, for immigrants. And it was true in the area of criminal justice reform. Since we're at the LGBTQ Foundation dinner, I'll talk about our advances, which were particularly remarkable. We had gone from a point where it was not even legal for us to have consensual same-sex relationships to a point where our marriages are legally recognized. Protections against hate crimes were expanded to include prohibitions against hate crimes on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. Don't Ask, Don't Tell had finally been repealed after so many years. And the Affordable Care Act was allowing many people who had never before been able to get insurance because of discrimination in the insurance industry to finally be able to meet their healthcare needs. And that wasn't just healthcare needs on behalf of LGBTQ people. That was an expansion of healthcare that crossed all kinds of lines. People of color, millions of Black and brown people had the ability to get insurance for the first time in their lives because of the Affordable Care Act. Rights of people of color expanded in many other ways as well. There was expansion in the Head Start programs so that kids could get a good start toward their education, which was particularly impactful on people who were both Black and brown and people who had limited economic means. There was progress in the restoration of land to Native Americans. And in the judiciary, there was an amazing amount of progress. The appointment, the lifetime appointment of 62 African American judges on the federal bench. And in a truly historic moment, the appointment of Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor, the very first Latinx woman on the Supreme Court. So that crossed all kinds of different boundaries. And in the intersection of race and national origin, there were other outstanding improvements as well. We witnessed the expansion of DACA, allowing people who were born in the United States to parents who had come from elsewhere to be able to go to college, to graduate, to get jobs, to work legally, and to live their lives fairly. Women also were gaining equality in all kinds of grounds, with the passage of the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, which made it more plausible for women to bring legal claims for fair and equal pay, with the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act. Likewise, people with disabilities saw major improvements in their lives, with increasing employment opportunities, with better economic and housing opportunities. And remarkably, our government was actually putting money and resources toward criminal justice reform, doing things like making sure that there wasn't an unfair disparity in sentencing for people who were convicted of cocaine use, depending on whether it was powder cocaine used by rich white people on the one hand, or crack cocaine used mostly by people of color and people in poverty. There's no reason why those should have been subject to disparate sentencing, except for pure and simple discrimination. And that's something that was changing. Food insecurity was something that our government was looking at. There were all kinds of amazing advancements. And so here we were working toward a system that was breaking down the inequality that has really created so many of the problems we're seeing right now. And we were on the precipice. In fact, we were all but certain that we were just about to elect our very first female president and continue on that path toward equality. But of course, that's not how things turned out. What we found out is that in a system that's built on structural inequality, those who are in power and those who rely on the forces of racism, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia, police brutality, and so many other ills to maintain our power are loath to let it go. And that's exactly what we saw with the real mobilization of the politics of fear and hate to ensure that we didn't end up continuing down the path toward a more equal United States. And unfortunately, the last 3.5 years has shown us just how quickly tyranny can take hold. And I'm not just being hyperbolic, it truly has. Every vulnerable population has felt the changes that have happened over the course of the last 3.5 years. Any of us who are LGBTQ, who are people of color, who are women, who are immigrants, who have disabilities, who have less economic resources, and particularly anybody who falls within more than one of those boxes, has experienced and is suffering from the profound and catastrophic effects of discrimination based on those kinds of classifications and others. Since we're at the LGBTQ dinner, I'm going to start there and talk about how quickly the erosion in our own rights has happened. Within a moment really of the inauguration, the administration made clear its goal of erasing us completely. Every mention of LGBTQ rights in the community was removed immediately from the White House's website, and the attacks went on from there. Transgender people were banned from military service. The Department of Education rolled back the Obama-era protections for students who were LGBTQ. The Trump administration even filed legal briefs supporting overt discrimination against people in employment because of their LGBTQ status. And this is really just a very few of the many ways that our rights have been rolled back in just the last 3.5 years. In fact, if I were to name all of them, I would probably take up all of my allotted time. So I'm going to go on and talk about some of the other horrifying changes to other members of our community. We weren't the only targets of fear and oppression. Particularly targeted were people of color. And one of the ways that we see that is the corrosive use of law and order style language to attack Black and brown people, to attack the Black Lives Matter movement, even though what the data actually shows is that well over 90% of all of the protests that have been undertaken by the Black Lives Matter movement and supporters were nonviolent. The administration has put forth a narrative that they are violent and dangerous. And with that narrative, the administration has actually overtly supported white supremacists who have come in armed to those demonstrations, putting people in serious danger and in fact even killing protesters. This is what we call the politics of fear, and this is the tyranny that we have allowed to take hold because of our failure to act and our failure to pay attention. There have likewise been all kinds of rollbacks in healthcare. Those too disproportionately affect Black and brown people. They disproportionately affect transgender people and transgender people of color in particular. They disproportionately affect women, and they disproportionately impact people who are unhoused and people who lack economic resources. The administration's really terrible response to the COVID-19 epidemic has also disproportionately impacted people of color. And I hate to say it, but I know that it's true that if it were rich white people who were the worst and most impacted by death and economic problems from COVID-19, the response would have been entirely different. But that's not what we saw. This is instead another attack on Black and brown people and people who are in poverty. And of course, women's rights are under attack as well, which should not come as some kind of a surprise to us. When we elect a president who boasted about grabbing women by the pussy, it's no surprise to now see that, in fact, our rights are disintegrating. Reproductive rights are under attack at every turn. The odds of us losing the ability to continue to have free and open reproductive rights in the Supreme Court are great. We're in peril in a way that we never have been since the 1970s. Of course, the attack on immigrants is likewise no surprise when we are talking about an administration that came in on the premise of building a wall to make sure that we know who was us and who was them. The entire premise was to make sure that we know who we support and who is other. And so that is what we have experienced over the course of the last 3 years. And of course, that impacts most greatly the people who fall within a combination of those boxes. But this intersection is also where we find our most powerful work and our most powerful ability to work together to be able to fight against these forces of tyranny, oppression. As Black lesbian feminist political analyst Audre Lorde put it, there's no such thing as a single issue struggle because we don't live single issue lives. That could not be farther from the truth. And what we see now is that the movements that are most successful are successful just because of that intersectionality. The Black Lives Matter movement is a perfect example. Just a year ago, I think things would have been entirely different. But right now, standing today, we have seen that the Black Lives Matter movement is supported by a majority of Americans, and it's intersectional by nature. It was intersectional by design, having been created by 3 Black queer women. So they didn't just say, we are supporting Black lives that matter, but all Black lives matter. The lives of Black transgender women, the lives of Black women, the lives of queer Black people. And that is important, and that is what has made the struggle so strong. As we're protesting these intersectional issues, the police brutality against people of color who are women, who are transgender, who are queer, who are disabled, we are finding new language of intersectionality, joining forces together to work more powerfully together. And this isn't something new. This is actually something that has been happening for quite some time. We also look at the Me Too movement. I think one of the people who we should most credit for the Me Too movement is African-American woman Anita Hill. Now, she wasn't successful in keeping the man who had sexually assaulted her from being appointed for his entire life to our federal Supreme Court, but she put her career at risk. She was an early person who spoke out against sexual violence, and she did so at great personal cost. Now, the more modern Me Too movement likewise was started by a Black woman who has also spoken out to make sure that women and sexual oppression doesn't continue to persist. And despite the best efforts of tyranny and oppression, we are continuing, because of the intersectionality of the Black Lives Matter movement, the Me Too movement, to move forward with those in a way that is meaningful and that is creating real, true, and lasting change. And this falls in a history of movements that have been led most successfully intersectionally by LGBTQ people and by women of color. And when I look at that, I think in particular of going back to the civil rights movement, led by women like Lily Mae Bradford and Rosa Parks, who refused to give up their seat on the bus, people who caused the Montgomery bus boycotts because of their courage in standing up. People like the Little Rock Nine. We're talking about 9 little Black girls who put their own lives on the line to desegregate the schools. We're talking about people like Fannie Lou Hamer, who served as one of the most influential people in the civil rights movement, serving to protect and expand voting rights for Black people, as well as economic justice. And we talk about people like Polly Murray, who was a non-binary person who coined the phrase Jane Crow. These are people who have paved the way for us and who have shown us the value of intersectionality from a long time ago up until today, a movement that still is bringing us forward. People of color, of course, have also been at the forefront of establishing rights for our LGBTQ community. And when we look back at the 1969 Stonewall riots, those were led in large part by LGBTQ people of color, who have created so much momentum that even now, with a Supreme Court that is stacked against us, the cultural shift toward the mandate of equality for us required that we are now able to work free from the fear that we will be fired simply because we are gay or transgender. That is a big deal, and it happens because of this movement that has been going on for decades. So our history of progress is a history of intersectionality, and that's as true today as it ever was. Now, as we move toward what is probably going to be the most important elections of all of our lifetimes, we have to be especially vigilant about attacks on free speech. We need to protect the rights of protesters, those who are speaking out against the evils of society. And we need to make sure that our press is free so that we know what is going on. More than anything else, we need to make sure that we are fighting against voter suppression, because we all need to be able to vote so that all of our voices are heard. As we speak out against racism, against police brutality, against xenophobia, against transphobia, against homophobia, against all of these ills, we must do so together, because that is how we are going to rise or fall.
Thank you so much, Mari, for sharing your amazing wisdom and your words with us today. I can't say enough how blessed we really are to have you as part of our community. Before we close the night out, there are two things that I'd like to share. So first, please take a minute to donate to the foundation through our Q Gives campaign. You can find the donation link on our website on the event page. Usually, our dinner is a little bit different, and we're able to collect some money through the fees that we charge for the dinner. This year, we're able to offer the dinner to all of our attendees at no cost, thanks to NCM and all of our sponsors. But we still do rely upon that money to be able to give all the scholarships each year. So please, please, please take that link, share it with family, friends, your firm, your boss, etc., and give, if you can, what you can. Second thing before we close the night, I do want to take a moment to recognize and observe the loss of one particularly notable jurist in our community, Justice Ginsburg. Justice Ginsburg died September 18th of this year, and no words can communicate the respect and the admiration that she deserves. Justice Ginsburg was a fearless leader on the court for gender equality and for civil rights, and she advocated for us to, quote, fight for the things that you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you. She left her followers with some hope, stating that, quote, justices continue to think and change. I am ever hopeful that if the court has a blind spot today, its eyes will be open tomorrow. Thank you all for attending this year's annual dinner to share and to celebrate the accomplishments of the Colorado LGBTQ community. We hope to see everyone next year, hopefully in person at the Sewell Ballroom, at the event that we've all come to love and enjoy, to celebrate our community's continued accomplishments. In the meantime, carry on, keep fighting the fight, and thank you for continuing to support the Colorado LGBT Bar Association and Foundation.
Happy Pride!
So the first time that I was holding the banner in the Pride Parade, I remember thinking, man, I hope that trans kids, especially trans kids of color, look at us and see what their future could be.
I mean, it's bizarre that all of this is happening in COVID times, right? Especially because the LGBT community knows better than anyone how important community and taking care of each other is.
You don't have to be the notorious RBG to belong in the Colorado LGBT Bar Association.
We're made up of lawyers, law students, and other legal professionals working to promote fair and just treatment under the law.
Happy Pride, everybody. Stay safe. Looking forward to celebrating with you next year. Remember, wear your masks.
Happy Pride, Colorado. Have fun and be safe. With our community's resilience, brilliance, and creativity, I think we can accomplish both. See you next year.